The bell over the door gave a dry clang as Amelia Carter stepped into the Gulfside Marksman Club in rural Florida. And though the room was full of chatter, gunpowder, and the stale scent of coffee, not a single person greeted her. Most barely looked up. Those who did just blinked, then returned to their scorecards and bravado-filled banter. Amelia, 34, a quiet but focused woman with dark brown skin and calloused hands, didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap on her weathered duffel bag and walked toward the front desk, her boots tapping a steady rhythm across the worn tile floor. Behind the counter, an older man in a camo vest with a faded name tag that read, "Gary," didn't smile. "Sign-ups are over there," he muttered, not even making eye contact. Amelia nodded once, silently, and walked to the clipboard. Her handwriting was neat, the kind practiced by someone who knew the power of appearances. She'd been overlooked before, misjudged more times than she could count. But today wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about honoring a promise she made a long time ago to always show up ready, even if no one expected her to, especially when they didn't expect her to. Amelia Carter sat quietly near the far end of the range, her duffel bag open beside her, hands moving with precise purpose as she laid out her gear gloves. Ear protection, a worn rifle case bearing the faint scuffs of time and use. Every movement deliberate, practiced, and free of wasted energy. Around her, the atmosphere buzzed with the casual noise of familiarity, grizzled regulars sharing jokes. Cliques gathered in corners, talking about scopes and recoil, none of them bothering to look twice at the woman in the plain green jacket and jeans who hadn't come to chat. A man with a thick southern drawl and a gut, straining against a camo tee, leaned toward his buddy and whispered just loud enough, "Bet she won't finish the round." His friend chuckled. Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't even glance their way. Instead, she checked the bolt on her rifle and tightened the strap on her glove. Her eyes remained calm, focused, not the calm of indifference, but the quiet clarity of someone who's weathered storms people like them couldn't imagine. The rangemaster's voice echoed over the loudspeaker, announcing the first group. Amelia had drawn a later slot, which meant she had time to observe. She watched carefully as each competitor stepped up, some jittery, some overconfident. A few handled their weapons well. Others flinched with every trigger pull. No one noticed her watching, but she was noting everything, not judging, just learning. Knowledge was as much a weapon as steel. Across the room, a local legend, Brent Callahan, a former state champ whose name had topped the leaderboards for nearly a decade, stood beside the vending machines, arms crossed, chatting with a small group of regulars. He occasionally glanced in her direction, more out of curiosity than malice, like a man trying to figure out if the stray cat in the yard was going to run or bite. Amelia met his eyes once, briefly, then looked away, uninterested in the unspoken challenge. She wasn't here for him. She was here for something older, something personal. The whispers continued around her as names were called and shots fired. But Amelia's mind stayed locked into rhythm. She flexed her fingers inside her gloves, felt the soft stretch of the material hug her skin, felt the familiar buzz of anticipation settle low in her chest. The louder the range became, the quieter she got inside. That was her strength. That had always been her edge. When the world made noise, she listened inward. A man passing by toward the restrooms chuckled under his breath as he walked past her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. They would all be looking soon enough. Her name moved up the sign-in sheet. Almost time. She zipped her rifle bag shut, put away everything she didn't need, and sat up straighter. No nerves, no sweat, just quiet readiness. The kind that came from years of training alone while the world bet against you. The kind of silence that made its own kind of noise when the trigger was finally pulled, when the loudspeaker finally crackled, calling her name, Amelia Carter. Lane. The noise in the room didn't stop, but it shifted, dipped for a second like a skipped beat in a song. A few heads turned, some with idle curiosity, others with something colder behind the eyes. but no one said a word. Amelia stood, lifting her rifle case with one hand, walking, with an even pace, past the murmurs and sideways glances toward the far lane near the windows, where the light spilled in soft and golden. She stepped up to the bench with no hesitation, unpacked her rifle with the same care she'd always used, each motion slow but sure. The kind of deliberate that made people second-guess their assumptions without realizing why. She set the rifle down, adjusted the scope, checked her stance, and waited for the signal. From the corner of the range, Brent Callahan leaned slightly forward, arms still crossed, a half smile twitching at the edge of his mouth, like he'd seen this story before and knew how it ended. The range master raised his hand. Shooter ready. Amelia gave a calm, steady nod. The signal dropped. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the range like a whip, sharp and clean. The bullet punched a perfect hole through the center ring. Not just close, but dead center flawless. For a breathless moment, the room froze. Conversations halted. Someone's water bottle hit the floor and rolled. Amelia didn't react. She chambered the next round like she was alone in a practice session. Her breathing smooth, her hands as steady as stone. Second shot, same result. Another bullseye. By the third, people started to shift in their seats. Whispers rippling across the gallery, like wind through dry grass. One man mumbled, "Who the hell is she?" Another said, "I thought she was just watching." The air turned electric. Brent's half-smile vanished. Now, his face tightened. Brows drawn low, lips pressed thin. The woman he hadn't even nodded at when she walked in was rewriting the score sheet without saying a single word. Amelia kept going round after round. No showmanship, no wasted motion, just pure, focused execution. When her first magazine emptied, the rangemaster walked up slowly, peered at the monitor, blinked, then blinked again. The cluster of bullet holes on the screen looked like a single ragged tear, too tight to measure cleanly. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, confused and impressed all at once. Amelia reloaded, her face expressionless. But inside, she could feel the shift, the way the air had turned from doubt to disbelief, to something close to awe. Still, she wasn't done. She had more to say. And she was saying it the way she knew best, one breath, one shot at a time. The men who had laughed earlier now sat still. Their posture changed, their bravado shrinking in the face of something they hadn't seen coming. Amelia Carter wasn't just here to compete. She was here to remind them that silence can hit harder than any noise, especially when it lands dead center. By the time Amelia Carter loaded her second magazine, the room had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small, noticeable ways. The kind of silence that crept in when people were forced to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. The men who had been trading jokes now sat forward, elbows on knees, watching closely. The ones who had scoffed barely made eye contact with each other anymore. Even Brent Callahan had shifted his weight, arms now at his sides, lips slightly parted, as if the air around him had thinned. Amelia's hands moved with mechanical rhythm load. Breathe. Aim. Fire. Each shot a perfect echo of the last. The target downrange looked like it had been punched by one round, not several. When her final shot of the second round tore through the same center as the others, the rangemaster didn't even wait. He walked to the screen, leaned in, then stepped back with a look of stunned disbelief, motioning for the owner. The owner, Gary, shuffled over, his clipboard forgotten in his hand, eyes narrowing at the screen, then widening slowly. He turned to Amelia, opened his mouth, then closed it again like he wasn't sure what language to use with someone who had just shattered every expectation in the room. You broke the standing record," he finally said. It came out flat, almost reluctant, like the words themselves refused to cooperate. Amelia didn't react. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She simply nodded, pulled off her gloves, and set them on the bench beside her. That nod, calm and centered, said everything she needed it to. Brent finally stepped away from the wall, walking slowly toward lane 8. Hands in his pockets like a man approaching something fragile, he stopped a few feet away, looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, really seeing her for the first time. "That was solid work," he said, his voice quiet, respectful, and just a little strained. Amelia met his eyes, gave a single nod. "Thanks." No gloating, no lecture, just the truth, spoken without apology. Behind them, someone started clapping, hesitant at first, then another, then a third. The sound was awkward, stuttering, but real. Amelia didn't bask in it. She just began packing up her things with the same calm efficiency she had walked in with. She didn't need the applause. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She had already proven it to herself. Still, something had changed, not just in the air, not just on the scoreboard, but in their eyes. They wouldn't forget her. Not today. And the next time someone like her walked in quiet, focused, easy to dismiss, maybe they'd think twice. Maybe they'd leave just a little more space. Amelia Carter had said nothing flashy, nothing loud, but every round she fired had spoken volumes, and everyone in that range had finally learned to listen. As Amelia Carter walked toward the exit, rifle bag slung over one shoulder, the air behind her still hummed with the aftermath of what had just happened. "Gary," the range owner called out behind her, clipboard in hand. "We'd like to put your photo on the Hall of Fame board." He pointed to the corkboard covered in yellowing photos and dust, dominated by Brent Callahan's picture for years. Amelia paused just long enough to make sure her words landed where they needed to. "I'm good," she said quietly, not dismissively, but with finality. Gary blinked, stunned, as if he couldn't imagine someone walking away from recognition so many others had chased. But Amelia didn't need a photo on the wall to validate what she already knew. She stepped into the Florida afternoon, sun warming her face, the salt of the Gulf hanging in the breeze. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from her father. "How'd it go?" Amelia allowed herself a real smile this time, and typed back, "Better than fine." As she drove home, windows down, music low, she thought not of the applause or the broken record, but of the quiet promise she had made to herself years ago to show up fully, unapologetically. Whether or not anyone expected it, that promise had carried her through doubt, through silence, through every sideways glance that said, "You don't belong." And now, it carried her into something new. A week later, she received a call from a youth outreach center in Tallahassee. They had heard what happened at the range, not from the news, but through word of mouth, whispered and passed along like a story that meant more than headlines ever could. "We're working with young girls from underrepresented backgrounds," the director explained. "They could really use someone like you, someone who's walked into a space and claimed it with grace." Amelia didn't answer right away, not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of what she'd represent. After a breath, she replied, "I don't talk much, but I show up. If that's enough, I'm in." A month later, she stood in front of a group of teenagers in a dusty community gym, her rifle cased at her side, her voice calm and steady as she told them about Clearwater, about silence, about the power of staying centered when the world tried to define you by its own broken lens. The girls listened, not because she raised her voice, but because her presence carried a truth too clear to ignore. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Weren't you scared?" Amelia smiled gently. "I was ready," she said, and in that moment, every girl in that room sat a little taller, a little straighter, because someone who looked like them had walked through fire and come out steady. Amelia Carter had broken a record. Yes, but more than that, she'd opened a door, and the most important thing about a door is what comes through after it's open. In the months that followed, Amelia Carter's life didn't explode into fame or fanfare. It unfolded with quiet purpose. She didn't do interviews, didn't chase likes or headlines, but the ripple she had created kept spreading. Her story traveled not through media channels, but through conversations, shared between fathers and daughters at kitchen tables, whispered between mentors and mentees in community centers, mentioned by coaches who wanted to show their students what quiet strength looked like. Back at the Gulfside Marksman Club, her absence was felt more than her presence ever had been. The bench where she had sat became a landmark of sorts, and for weeks afterward, competitors found themselves measuring their posture, their form. Against an invisible standard, Brent Callahan came in less frequently, and when he did, he didn't talk as loud. Something had shifted in him, not broken, but bent just enough to let in a different kind of light. Amelia, meanwhile, was busy building something new. She started holding quiet weekend workshops for teenage girls in a borrowed room at a recreation center, where she taught them the fundamentals of marksmanship, but more importantly, the fundamentals of self-respect. The first lesson wasn't about aiming or trigger control. It was about breathing, about stillness, about listening to your own voice in the midst of noise. She didn't try to inspire them with speeches. She showed up, she watched, she listened, and slowly, they began to mirror her confidence. Some of the girls had never held a rifle before, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was the stance they learned to take not just behind the bench, but in life. Word got out. Donations trickled in. Someone offered to sponsor equipment. A retired coach volunteered to help. Still, Amelia kept it small. She believed in the power of scale, of intimate change, of knowing each girl by name. One Saturday, after a quiet morning session, a student named Rena lingered behind. She was 13, shy, with a stubborn streak that Amelia recognized from her own reflection years ago. "Do you think people will ever really see me?" she asked. Not looking up, Amelia knelt beside her, her tone even and sure. "Only if you see yourself first. The rest comes after." It wasn't a magical fix. Rena didn't transform overnight, but the next week, she returned, standing a little straighter, aiming a little truer. That was growth, not in headlines or records, but in the slow rebuilding of someone's belief in their own worth. Amelia carried each of those stories like quiet medals. She never wore them, never spoke of them, but they shaped her steps, her choices, her continued commitment to showing up not just as a shooter, but as a guide. She had come into that range to keep a promise to herself. Now she was helping others make and keep their own. And with every breath they took before pulling the trigger, she knew the world was shifting again steadily, quietly. One voice, one shot, one girl at a time. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Amelia Carter found herself alone on the back porch of her small home, just outside of Dunedin, the last of the late summer sun painting the sky in streaks of orange and faded gold. Her dog, a sleepy old Labrador named Max, snored beside her feet while the sound of distant crickets pulsed like a slow, steady metronome. She sat with a glass of sweet tea in one hand and her journal in the other, flipping through pages of notes, reflections, and names, girls she had taught, moments she wanted to remember. Her thumb paused on a scribbled phrase near the top of a page, written weeks ago in block letters. "You don't have to shout to be heard." She stared at the words, smiled, and underlined them again. It had started with a single day, a single room full of strangers who underestimated her before she had even spoken. Now, that day had turned into a story that traveled further than she'd ever intended. Not because she tried to make noise, but because her silence had been too sharp, too steady, to ignore. The messages still came, emails from parents, notes from students, even the occasional letter from someone who had been at the range that day. One in particular stuck with her, from a man who admitted he had doubted her, laughed even, until her first shot rewrote the atmosphere. "You changed something in me," he wrote, "not because you proved me wrong, because you didn't try to. You just did what you came to do." Amelia folded that letter neatly and tucked it between the pages of her journal. The world, she realized, rarely changed in big, dramatic moments. It shifted in subtle recalibrations in someone thinking twice before judging, In a girl speaking up when she used to stay silent. In a quiet kind of courage that echoed louder than anger ever could. She stood, stretched, and glanced out toward the narrow road beyond her fence. Life kept moving. The news cycles had moved on. The names on the scoreboards would change again. And the crowd at the range would go back to its routines. But somewhere, in 100 different places, someone was carrying a piece of her story. Maybe they wouldn't remember her name. Maybe they wouldn't remember the exact grouping on the target, but they would remember how it felt to watch someone walk into a room and change everything, not by shouting, but by standing firm. Amelia took one last sip of tea, patted Max on the head, and stepped back inside, the screen door creaking softly behind her. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She didn't need a title. She just wanted the next girl to walk through a door and feel like she didn't have to shrink to fit it. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The lesson Amelia Carter left behind didn't echo through applause or headlines. It echoed in the stillness after her final shot, in the way silence carried more power than a room full of noise. What she proved wasn't just skill, it was presence. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand validation, didn't conform to what others expected. She simply showed up, calm and prepared, and did what she came to do. The world often tells people, like her, quiet, unassuming, overlooked to wait for permission. But Amelia's story teaches that you never needed it. You don't have to explain who you are to people who don't ask. You don't have to announce your worth. You have to know it. And when the time comes, when the light hits you at just the right angle, and the eyes finally turn toward you, what matters most is not whether they see you, but that you never stop seeing yourself. In everyday life, you won't always walk into rooms where you're welcomed or expected. Sometimes you'll be ignored, doubted, or underestimated before you say a word. But like Amelia, your power lies not in proving others wrong, but in being ready when it counts. Show up prepared, stay grounded in your values, and trust your skill. Whether you're a student, a professional, an artist, or someone rebuilding quietly from the background, your moment will come. And when it does, let your actions speak the truth about who you are. You don't have to shout to lead. You don't need recognition to matter. You just need to hold your line and hit your mark.